When we speak of a wound, especially the kind inflicted by the methodical dismantling of a self by another, we are not talking about a simple cut or a visible bruise. We are speaking of an erosion, a slow, quiet hollowing out that happens in plain sight. We are describing the theft of your own inner landscape, where your certainty, your joy, your very sense of reality is replaced by a fog of doubt and confusion. Narcissistic abuse is not an act of violence. It is a climate. It is the steady, chilling pressure of a world built around another's ego, where you exist only as a reflection or a resource. And the one who breathes this toxic air most deeply is the empath, the soul whose very nature is to connect, to feel, to absorb the emotional currents of the world. The empath is like a resonant chamber, built to amplify the music of life, but it can just as easily amplify the dissonance of a lie. It's a psychic vertigo, a deep disorientation when such a person meets a narcissist, who is the archetype of the void, the black hole of need dressed in the illusion of light. This is no chance encounter. It is a collision of archetypes, a drama where one is drained and the other is filled. But here is the paradox that changes everything. This devastating encounter is also a summons. What is attacked in the empath is precisely what has been dormant, waiting to be claimed. What feels like an annihilation is, in fact, an initiation. The narcissist, playing their part in the shadows, is the unintentional catalyst, the harsh teacher who forces the empath into the final, defining trial of their own soul. But what is this final stage? Many mistakenly believe healing means rewinding the clock, getting back to who you were before the betrayal, before the pain. This is a fantasy of restoration, not a reality of growth. The empath's final stage is not to go back. It is to be forged. The person you were before the narcissist is gone forever. That path is closed, because to return would be to refuse the lesson. The way forward is into a new state of being, one that exists beyond the simple roles of victim or rescuer. It is a new architecture of the self, where you are no longer a sponge for others' projections, nor a martyr to your own desperate need to fix what is broken. The final stage is the conscious ownership of your own power, the integration of your own shadow, and the awakening of a self that is no longer fooled by the mirage of perfect love or the drama of endless pain. Think of a recurring dream. I have heard from those who have walked this path. They are in a beautiful house, but the walls are made of mirrors. Everywhere they look, they see a distorted, smiling reflection of someone else. They feel trapped, suffocated by these images. They search for a window, a door, anything real, but find only more reflections. This is the core experience of narcissistic abuse, being trapped in a house of mirrors, losing your own face, believing the reflection is the reality. But the dream does not stop there. In a moment of despair, the dreamer strikes a mirror and it shatters. Behind it is not another mirror, but an open field under a real sky. This is the final stage. This is the moment you realize the validation, the love, the reality you sought in the other was a projection all along. The light was never in them. It was always in you. The empath, conditioned for so long to be a mirror, must finally become the source. The narcissist is the hammer that shatters the false reality, the shadow guide who, by trying to imprison you, forces you to find the key that was always in your own pocket. This stage is not won easily. It is born from despair, from the ashes of your most cherished illusions. So many fight this. The empath will cling to the hope that with more love, more patience, the more sacrifice, the narcissist will finally change. This is the savior complex turned toxic, the healer becoming addicted to the wound. Yet, as I have witnessed in soul after soul, a breaking point arrives. The empath wakes up one morning, not with rage or sorrow, but with a profound and unfamiliar quiet. Something has finally broken. The need to earn their existence through self-abandonment, the compulsion to offer water to a mirage. In that quiet, the empath understands that what they were pursuing was not love for another, but a stand in for their own unacknowledged self-love. The narcissist, in a strange way, is a caricature of the empath's own repressed shadow, their own secret wish to be prioritized without begging, to receive without endless giving, to be the center of their own universe. The empath, having judged this impulse as selfish, casts it out, only to find it living and breathing in the person of the narcissist. The relationship, then, is not just between two people. It is a distorted conversation between a self and its own dissound parts. The spell is broken only when the empath has the courage to reclaim this shadow, to admit that they too have a healthy need for boundaries and self-interest. At that moment, the narcissist loses their hypnotic power, because they are no longer holding a missing piece of the empath's soul. The final stage, then, is not about revenge or even a simple act of forgiveness. It is about retrieval. It is the empath looking into the wreckage of what they experienced and seeing the signature of the psyche's fundamental law. You can only become whole when you embrace all that you are. To demonize the narcissist is to remain afraid of your own shadow. To stay with them is to be lost in the projection. But to see them as the harsh catalyst for your own completion, that is liberation. Think of a master sculptor working with a block of raw, unformed stone. The sculptor does not hate the stone, nor do they worship it. They see the potential within. They apply pressure, they chip away, they strike it with force, not to destroy it, but to reveal the form that is hidden inside. So it is with the empath. The relationship with the narcissist is the raw material, dense, difficult, painful. The empath is the sculptor, though they don't know it at the beginning. Through the pressure of suffering, they are forced to pick up the tools of self-awareness. And in that crucible, they awaken to their own power to create. When they emerge, they are no longer a shapeless block defined by another's force, but a work of art, beautiful not because they are without flaws, but because they have been through the fire and found their true form. But I must offer a caution: this stage is not about egoic victory. Many empaths, after breaking free, feel a surge of superiority, a sense of having won. This is just another trap, a fragile armor against true feeling. The genuine final stage is marked by a deep humility before the self. It is the recognition that this awakening was not an act of will, but the work of a deeper intelligence within you, the archetype of wholeness that guides every soul home. The empath bows to this inner guide, understanding that even the most painful chapter was part of a larger story, a necessary passage in which nothing was truly lost. I have worked with people who, after years of this erosion, would describe themselves as ghosts, as empty shells. But when they started to dream again, when the symbols began to rise from their unconscious, I saw life return. One dreamed of walking through a barren field after a fire and seeing green shoots pushing up through the ash. Another dreamed of a shattered compass whose needle, once broken, now pointed steadily inward, toward their own heart. These are not just pictures. They are bulletins from the soul, announcing that the final stage is not destruction, but creation, not emptiness, but fertility. The empath, arriving here, no longer needs to merge with others to feel alive. They understand the sacred boundary around the self, not as a fortress to keep others out, but as the shoreline of their own being, allowing the tide of connection to come in and go out without flooding the land. They become healers, not by taking on pain, but by radiating a presence that has been tested by fire. They can love without disappearing, give without being depleted, and feel sorrow without being destroyed. The narcissist is no longer the main character in their story. The shadow is no longer a monster in the dark. They have become whole, and in that wholeness, they are finally truly free. This is the secret. The empath's final stage is not about overcoming weakness or gaining power, but about realizing the self. It is a return to the center, where all opposites meet, where the wounded self becomes the doorway to wisdom, and where the soul learns that even the darkest journeys are in service of the light. There is a strange silence that comes when the empath finally pulls their foot out of the trap of abuse. It's not peaceful at first. It's the silence of a void. It feels like standing in the dead calm at the eye of a hurricane, where the destructive winds that defined your life have suddenly ceased, and all you can hear is the pounding of your own heart. This silence is profoundly unsettling for someone who has learned to navigate life by the emotional storms of another. The empath's identity has been forged in reflection, in sensing the unspoken needs of a partner, in absorbing the anxieties that filled the room. When that source of chaos is removed, when the connection is severed, the empath is confronted with a terrifying question. Who am I when I'm not managing someone else's reality? This question is the gateway to the final stage, because only in the stark quiet of this new space can the true self finally be heard. The empath starts to suspect that what they labeled as unconditional love was sometimes a strategy to avoid their own fear of being alone, that their deep compassion was at times a shield against their own inner emptiness. This is the archetype of the wasteland. The wasteland is the place where you are forced to face your own spiritual thirst until you have no choice but to dig a well within yourself. Stripped of the other person as an organizing principle, the empath feels the raw exposure of solitude, and it is in this very solitude that the first real seed of selfhood begins to grow. Often, critical dreams will surface here. I remember a client who dreamed she was a ship tethered to a huge, unstable anchor that was dragging her down into the abyss. In the dream, she found a knife and, with tremendous effort, cut the rope. The anchor plunged into darkness, and her ship, suddenly light, began to rise, carried by its own buoyancy. This is the psyche illustrating the journey. The abuser forces you to the point where you must finally cut the cord to your own self-betrayal. The act feels like a loss, a plunge into the unknown, but it is the prerequisite for liberation. It is common at this stage for a surge of anger to rise, not just at the narcissist, but at oneself, for the complicity, for the willful blindness, for the years of self-abandonment. This anger is not a problem to be solved, it is a sacred energy. For too long, empaths have been conditioned to believe anger is a spiritual failure, that virtue lies in infinite patience. But unexpressed anger turns inward, becoming depression, resentment, and disease. When it finally surfaces, it's not a step backward, but a vital sign of life. Because anger, when honored, becomes the psychic fire that forges boundaries and clarifies truth. Without it, the empath is a benevolent phantom, lacking substance. With it, they begin to inhabit their own life, to claim their sovereign right to exist for themselves. This is where the shadow work becomes essential. The empath must confront the part of themselves that unconsciously chose this dynamic, the part that used self-sacrifice as a form of control or a source of identity. It's a bitter pill to swallow, but this is the key. The empath was not merely a passive recipient of cruelty. They also gained a sense of purpose, of being the better person, the resilient healer, from their role in the drama. Facing this doesn't excuse the narcissist's abuse, but it restores balance. It frees the empath from the gilded cage of their own innocence. True selfhood is not built on a fantasy of being purely good, but on the capacity to hold the paradox that we are all a mix of light and shadow, healer and wounded, saint and sinner. Only when the empath can see this complexity in themselves does the compulsive need to replay the old story dissolve. Think again of that alchemical principle, the union of opposites. The empath and the narcissist are two sides of the same coin. One is all giving, the other all taking. Both are out of balance. The final stage for the empath is to integrate the very energies they outsourced to the narcissist. They must learn to receive, to set limits, to honor their own desires, to embody a healthy version of the self-possession that the narcissist warped into exploitation. The narcissist wielded these things as weapons. The empath must learn to wield them as tools, guided by the wisdom of the heart. In this synthesis, they become whole. At this point, many report a feeling like they are molting. Like a snake, the old skin of the perpetual giver becomes tight and cracks, falling away to reveal a new self underneath. The empath begins to know themselves as a sovereign entity, not just an extension of another's emotional state. They learn a profound truth. It is only when they cease to absorb others' pain out of compulsion that they can truly help others heal. This is because their presence now comes not from a place of emptiness seeking to be filled, but from a place of fullness overflowing. The archetype of the wounded healer is activated here. The empath who has navigated the underworld of narcissistic abuse is now uniquely qualified to be a guide for others still lost in that maze. But unlike before, when their helping was a bid for love and validation, now it is simply the natural expression of their own integrated being. They no longer have to save someone to feel worthy of existing. They have walked through their own death and rebirth. What they offer now is not codependence, but clarity. But be warned, this is not a linear journey. The final stage doesn't grant immunity from pain or erase the scars of the past. It provides awareness. They might still encounter manipulative people, still feel the familiar pull of old dynamics. But now there is an inner observer, a wise voice that says, "You know this dance. You don't have to join in." The empath feels the temptation, but no longer mistakes it for love. This is freedom, not freedom from feeling, but freedom from being controlled by it. The image that arises is that of a tree that has weathered a great storm. The storm may have broken branches and stripped leaves, but in response, the tree's roots have grown deeper, gripping the earth more firmly. The narcissist was the storm that threatened to uproot you. The struggle, while terrible, forced you to find your own grounding, your own unshakable center. And now, you bear the marks of the storm, but you are still standing, stronger and more deeply rooted than before. This is the mystical truth. In the language of mythology, the empath has completed a hero's journey. They were the hero lured into the dragon's lair, not by treasure, but by the promise of love. They had to face the dragon, which was both the narcissist and their own shadow. And like all true heroes, they returned from the lair changed, carrying the treasure of self-knowledge. This is why I insist the final stage is not recovery. Recovery means you get back something you lost, but individuation means you become something more. The empath after this trial is not the same person. They are not just repaired, they are transformed. And this transformation brings with it the sacred duty to live from this new center, to never again betray the self, to honor their own truth above the demands and manipulations of others. The silence that was once a terrifying void becomes a sanctuary of inner strength. They learn to be alone without being lonely, to feel deeply without losing their ground, to love with an open heart and a strong spine. Their compassion finally becomes complete because it now includes themselves. They see the narcissist not as a monster to be hated forever, but as a shadow figure who, through their darkness, forced them to find their own light. And from this place, a true forgiveness can arise, not the cheap grace of excusing harm, but the profound peace of knowing that even the most destructive experiences can serve the soul's relentless drive toward wholeness. This is the empath's final truth. They were never weak, never broken at their core, never truly defined by the abuse. They were in the midst of a powerful initiation, spoken in the ancient language of the soul. And now, standing on the other side, they carry not just wounds but wisdom, not just memories but meaning. The narcissist took so much, but in the taking, they unknowingly gave the empath the greatest gift of all themselves. There is a moment, and it often arrives not with a thunderclap, but with a quiet breath, when the empath feels the first true pulse of their own center. It isn't a feeling of victory or even of happiness, but of a subtle, internal click, a whisper that says, "You can stop performing now. You are already enough." This whisper is the voice of the self, which was buried for so long under the rubble of others' needs, finally making its way to the surface. And with its arrival, a new way of being begins. It is a life no longer measured by how much pain one can endure or how selflessly one can love the unloving, but by how honestly one can honor the deep patterns of the psyche that were once invisible. For too long, the empath was a willing actor in the archetypal play of the martyr and the persecutor. The narcissist was the villain, yes, but beneath that, there was a secret pact, the empath's unconscious agreement to keep bleeding in order to avoid facing their own emptiness. And now the play is over. The curtain has fallen. The empath sees that the suffering was real, but it was not random. The psyche never stages such an intense drama without a purpose. The self teaches through dreams, through relationships, through projections that feel like fate, until the soul has no choice but to confront its own hidden nature. The empath starts to have dreams with a different quality. The nightmares of being chased, trapped, or silenced give way to images of discovery, of building, of new territories. A patient once told me of a dream where she stood at the edge of a chasm. For years, she had waited for someone to build a bridge for her. In this new dream, she realized the stones to build the bridge were lying at her own feet. She began to build it herself. Such dreams are not mere fantasy. They are communiques from the unconscious, signaling a shift into the stage of active creation. The empath is no longer a victim of their landscape. They are becoming the architect of their own path forward. But this path requires a sacrifice. It demands the shedding of old identities, comforting roles, and cherished delusions. The empath must surrender the belief that their value comes from their suffering, that their love is a magical force that can change others, that self-neglect is a form of holiness. These ideas, which may have once been survival strategies, now become the bars of a new prison. If they are not released, the empath will simply find a new narcissist, a new drama, a new way to repeat the old lesson. Only by daring to let that old self, the noble, suffering self, die, can the true self be born. This is why many describe this stage as a second birth, preceded by a death. It is a grieving process, not just for the lost time and the pain, but for the person they tried so hard to be, the one who was defined entirely by others. In this grief, the archetype of the phoenix becomes real. The fire of truth burns the false self to ash, and from those ashes, something new, authentic, and winged rises. The empath, through this trial, is reborn not as a mirror, but as a light. And here is the beautiful paradox. This rebirth does not isolate them from the world, but connects them to it more deeply and authentically than ever before. Where once they merged with others, now they meet others. Their compassion is no longer a liability, because it is married to discernment. They can say no with kindness and dice with conviction. They can sit with another's pain without being consumed by it. They can love without losing their own soul. This is the gift of individuation, to be a whole, sovereign self that allows others the dignity of their own journey, without a compulsive need to interfere, manage, or rescue. The empath now discovers the archetype of the inner guide, the wise old one within. This figure might appear in dreams or meditations, offering quiet counsel. At first, the empath might not trust it, having been trained to seek wisdom from external sources. But slowly, they learn that this inner voice is the true authority they were always searching for in the narcissist. The sense of certainty, the promise of being seen and understood, was always a projection of this deep inner wisdom. Now, they learn to listen to themselves, to trust the voice that speaks not with the urgency of ego, but with the quiet clarity of the soul. And yet, even at this advanced stage, the path is not without its challenges. The empath, awakening to this new consciousness, can feel like a stranger in a familiar land. They look at the world and see the subtle games of manipulation and codependence playing out everywhere. This can be lonely at first, as if they've climbed a mountain and left everyone else behind. But with time, they realize this clarity isn't meant to create separation, but to foster true connection. Because once you have walked through the fire of narcissistic abuse and emerged with your soul intact, you carry a light that can illuminate the shadows for others. This is often when empaths become true healers, artists, teachers, or guides, not because they are trying to fix anyone anymore, but because their very presence, grounded, authentic, and free of agendas, creates a space where others can begin their own journey of healing. This is the empath's final offering to the world, not the frantic gift of self-sacrifice, but the steady, radiant gift of their own hard-won wholeness. You must understand that this final stage is not perfection. It is not an end to fear or pain, or the human longing for connection. It is rather a change in relationship to these things. The empath can now observe their own shadow patterns without being hijacked by them. They can feel their own wounds without becoming lost in them. They can even recognize a narcissist from a distance, feel the old pull, and simply choose to walk away. This is the mastery of awareness, not the mastery of control. From a spiritual perspective, the soul has finally returned to its own center. Imagine the self as a circle with a still point in the middle. For so long, the empath lived on the chaotic circumference, endlessly orbiting the needs, moods, and dramas of others. Now, slowly and deliberately, they have walked the path back to the center. From this still point, the opposites no longer tear them apart. They see that light and shadow, giving and receiving, joy and sorrow, all belong to the one great reality. They no longer demonize the dark, for they know it holds the keys to wisdom. They no longer chase only the light, for they know that light without shadow has no depth. They have learned to stand in the sacred tension of it all, and in that tension, they are finally at peace. It is as if the empath's own life becomes a living myth, not a fantasy, but a story that embodies a timeless truth. They are the one who went down into the underworld and came back with the flame of consciousness. They are the one who faced the one who consumes and refused to be consumed. They are the one who shed their old skin and learned to fly. In their story, others can see a map for their own, and so the cycle that continues is not one of trauma, but of awakening. This is why I say to you, the final stage for the empath after narcissistic abuse is not survival, it is soul-making. It is the sacred journey from being defined by another to being defined by the self. In this final stage, the empath stops being the victim of the wound and becomes the living embodiment of the wholeness that was born from it. They become not just healed, but a source of healing, not just free, but a symbol of freedom, not just whole, but a testament to what it means to be fully, courageously human. As the empath fully inhabits this final stage, their entire perception of the world shifts. What once seemed like a random, cruel battlefield of users and the used now reveals itself as a vast, intricate dance of archetypes, orchestrated by a wisdom far greater than any one personality. The narcissist is no longer just a person who hurt them, they are a human vessel for the devouring shadow, the archetype of insatiable hunger. The empath is no longer just a victim, they are a vessel for the archetype of boundless receptivity. When these two forces meet in the human realm, the result is devastating. But viewed from the perspective of the soul's journey, it becomes clear that such collisions are more than just personal tragedies. They are initiations into the very mystery of what it means to have a self. The empath, having come through this fire, begins to see their personal story as a chapter in a universal myth. They see themselves in the ancient tales, in Persephone's descent, in Inanna's journey through the 7 gates, in the story of the wounded healer who finds the cure within their own affliction. This reframing does not negate the pain, it consecrates it, it gives it meaning. And meaning is the ultimate balm for the soul, not the absence of suffering, but the transformation of suffering into a sacred purpose. At this stage, a powerful creative current is often unleashed. The very energy that was once siphoned off by the drama now becomes fuel for self-expression. The pain that once rendered them mute now demands a voice. You see them begin to write, to create art, to mentor, to build. For others, the creation is their life itself. They live with a quiet radiance that becomes an inspiration to everyone they meet. The self, once it is found, does not wish to stay hidden. It seeks to shape the world in alignment with the truth it has discovered. By becoming whole, the empath becomes a conduit for the archetypal energies that are the birthright of every human soul. Yet this is tempered by a profound humility. The empath knows they are not cured of shadow, not immune to their own projections, not superior to others. They have learned firsthand how fragile the ego is, how seductive delusion can be, and how easily one can fall back into old patterns. This hard-won humility is the hallmark of true integration. They know they are human, flawed and finite, but they also know that the self within them is vaster than their flaws. And that wholeness is not about being perfect, but about being complete. The final stage is therefore a life lived in paradox. The empath becomes more powerful yet more gentle, more boundaried yet more open, more self-possessed yet more compassionate. They can look at their past and hold both the horror and the gratitude. They no longer need to whitewash the darkness to celebrate the light. Both are threads in the tapestry of their being. And in this acceptance of paradox, they discover a deep peace. Not the peace of a life without problems, but the peace of a self that can stand at the center of life's contradictions without being torn asunder. Dreams at this stage often contain images of synthesis mandalas, intertwined spirals, circles, or sacred marriage. One person dreamed of discovering a hidden spring inside a volcano, with cool water flowing from the heart of the fire. Another dreamed of weaving a rope from threads of darkness and light, which then became a ladder to the stars. These are not random images. They are the psyche's seal of approval, confirming that integration is happening. The volcano of rage now contains a spring of life. The threads of suffering have become a way to ascend. It is only from this place that true forgiveness can bloom, not as a moral duty or an act of denial, but as a natural byproduct of wholeness. The empath doesn't forget or excuse the cruelty of the narcissist, but they realize that to hold on to hatred is to remain psychically tethered to the abuser. Forgiveness in this context is not for the narcissist. It is the final act of self-love. It is the cutting of the last energetic cord of resentment, the willingness to let the ghost of the past finally rest. In that act of release, the empath is no longer defined by what happened to them, but by who they have become. And who they have become is a carrier of wisdom forged in fire, a healer who has walked through their own hell, a soul who has met both their shadow and their light and has chosen to embrace both. They are no longer just an empath. They are a whole person. The narcissist provided the crucible, but the fire inside them revealed their own innate gold. This is why I say the final stage is not survival. It is transfiguration. They no longer live in reaction to others. They live from their own center, luminous, whole, and unafraid of the beautiful complexity of their own soul. They embody the truth that the psyche's goal is not comfort, but completeness, not the avoidance of darkness, but its integration. And by living this truth, they become a light for others, a living reminder that even our most terrifying initiations are a call to the birth of the self. So I will leave you with this thought. Do not curse the road you have traveled, no matter how brutal it has been. Do not try to simply forget the past, because in that past are the seeds of your becoming. Do not chase an illusion of untouchable goodness, because your wholeness is found in embracing all of your humanity. Instead, stand at the center of your own life. Gaze into your own shadow with courage. Listen for the quiet voice of the self, and trust that you have already survived the fire. What remains is not the fragile identity you once had, but the indestructible core that was always there, waiting to be discovered. This is the final stage of the empath, to know that what was shattered was only the shell, not the soul. To realize that what was stolen was only an illusion, not your essence. To understand that the abuser was not the end of your book, but the dark and necessary doorway through which you walked into your real story. And when you step through that door, when you finally stand on the other side, you will know it with a certainty that needs no explanation. You are whole. You are free. You are yourself. And no shadow from within or without can ever truly diminish you again.